The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Carnarvon Castle as workers prepared for what would become one of the most memorable ceremonies in modern British history. It was 1969, and 20-year-old Prince Charles was about to become the Prince of Wales in a tradition that stretched back centuries. Charles had always known this day would come, but knowing something and living it are two very different things. As a young man studying at Trinity College, Cambridge, he found himself caught between the weight of tradition and the changing world around him. The 1960s were a time of revolution. Young people were questioning authority, music was changing, and the old ways of doing things were being challenged everywhere. The decision to hold the investiture at Carnarvon Castle was not made lightly. This ancient fortress in North Wales had been the birthplace of the first English Prince of Wales in 1284. The castle's weathered walls had witnessed centuries of Welsh history, both triumphant and tragic. For many Welsh people, the English conquest of Wales was still a painful memory, even after all these years. Queen Elizabeth II understood the delicate nature of what they were attempting. She wanted her son to truly connect with the Welsh people, not just receive an empty title. This is why she made an unprecedented decision. Charles would spend a term at the University College of Wales in Aberystwyth, learning Welsh language and culture. The young prince arrived in Aberystwyth in April 1969, just 3 months before his investiture. He lived in a modest dormitory room, attended lectures on Welsh history, and struggled with the complex Welsh language. His teacher, Edward Millward, was actually a Welsh nationalist who had initially opposed the investiture. Yet even he found himself impressed by Charles's genuine effort to understand Wales and its people. Charles threw himself into his studies with surprising enthusiasm. He learned about the ancient Celtic traditions, the mining communities that had shaped modern Wales, and the proud literary heritage of the Welsh people. He visited coal mines, talked with farmers, and attended rugby matches where the crowds gradually warmed to this earnest young man who was clearly trying his best. But not everyone was pleased with the upcoming ceremony. A group calling itself the Free Wales Army had formed in opposition to what they saw as an English publicity stunt. They viewed the investiture as a symbol of English dominance over Wales, a reminder of centuries of occupation. Some extremists even made bomb threats, forcing security services to take extraordinary precautions. The controversy reached its peak when 2 members of a Welsh nationalist group were killed by their own bomb just days before the ceremony. The explosion occurred as they were apparently preparing an attack on the railway line that would carry the royal train to Wales. The incident shocked both supporters and opponents of the investiture, highlighting how deeply some people felt about the issues involved. Meanwhile, preparations at Carnarvon Castle continued with military precision. The ancient courtyard was transformed into an outdoor theater, with seating for 4,000 guests. Television crews from around the world set up their equipment, as this would be one of the first major royal ceremonies to be broadcast in color. The ceremony itself was being designed as a careful balance between ancient tradition and modern sensibilities. The regalia, the coronet, ring, rod, and mantle were created specially for the occasion. The coronet was made of Welsh gold, a metal considered particularly precious because of its rarity and connection to the land of Wales. Charles spent hours practicing the complex ceremony with its ancient Welsh and Latin phrases. He would need to kneel before his mother, swear allegiance to her as his sovereign, and receive the symbols of his new role. The words he would speak had been carefully chosen to respect both English royal tradition and Welsh national pride. As the date approached, Charles found himself genuinely moved by the warmth many Welsh people had shown him during his time in Aberystwyth. What had begun as a dutiful preparation for a ceremonial role had become something deeper, a real appreciation for the culture and people he was being asked to represent. The night before the investiture, Charles walked alone through the grounds of Carnarvon Castle, thinking about the enormous responsibility he was about to accept. At 20, he was taking on a role that would define much of his life. The ancient stones around him had witnessed the investiture of many princes before him, but none in such a glare of modern publicity, and none at a time when the very nature of monarchy was being questioned. Television producers estimated that over 500 million people worldwide would watch the ceremony, making it one of the most viewed events in television history up to that point. The pressure was enormous, but Charles had learned something important during his time in Wales, that genuine respect and understanding could bridge even the deepest cultural divides. As he prepared for sleep on that final night, the young prince could hear the sound of Welsh voices singing traditional songs in the town below. Tomorrow, he would become their prince, but tonight, he was just a young man who had discovered the beauty and complexity of a culture he was only beginning to understand. The ceremony would mark not just Charles's formal recognition as Prince of Wales, but also a new chapter in the relationship between the royal family and the Welsh people. What had started as a traditional royal ceremony had evolved into something more meaningful, a genuine attempt at cultural bridge building at a time when such understanding was desperately needed. The morning of July 1st, 1969, would soon dawn, bringing with it a day that would be remembered for decades to come. July 1st, 1969, dawned bright and clear over North Wales, as if the weather itself was cooperating with the historic day ahead. By dawn, thousands of people were already making their way to Carnarvon, arriving by train, bus, and car from across Wales and beyond. The small town, usually quiet and peaceful, buzzed with an energy that hadn't been felt for centuries. Inside the castle walls, final preparations were taking place with clockwork precision. The red carpet was rolled out across the ancient cobblestones, television cameras were tested one final time, and security personnel made their last-minute checks. The threat of protest had not disappeared, and everyone involved knew that this day needed to proceed without incident. Queen Elizabeth II had arrived the night before, staying at a nearby location to avoid any security risks. She understood better than anyone the symbolic importance of what was about to happen. This wasn't just about giving her son a title. It was about the monarchy's relationship with Wales and, in many ways, its relevance in the modern world. Prince Charles woke early, his stomach tight with nerves. He had rehearsed every moment of the ceremony countless times, but nothing could truly prepare him for the reality of having the eyes of the world upon him. He thought about his time in Aberystwyth, the Welsh friends he had made, and the responsibility he was about to accept. As guests began arriving at the castle, the diversity of the crowd was striking. There were Welsh farmers in their best suits, standing alongside foreign dignitaries in formal dress. Coal miners who had met Charles during his visits to Welsh mining communities sat near members of the House of Lords. The ceremony was bringing together people who would normally never share the same space. The Welsh guards, resplendent in their red tunics and bearskin hats, lined the route as the royal family made their way into the castle. The sound of their band playing traditional Welsh airs echoed off the ancient walls, creating an atmosphere that was both solemn and celebratory. At exactly 2:30 p.m., the ceremony began with a fanfare of trumpets that could be heard throughout the town. The Garter King of Arms, in his magnificent ceremonial robes, proclaimed the start of the investiture in both English and Welsh, acknowledging the bilingual nature of Wales and the importance of the Welsh language. Charles entered the castle courtyard wearing the blue dress uniform of the Royal Regiment of Wales, walking slowly and solemnly toward the dais where his mother waited. The television cameras captured every step, broadcasting this ancient ritual to viewers in dozens of countries around the world. The ceremony itself was a carefully choreographed blend of pageantry and symbolism. The letters patent that created Charles as Prince of Wales were read aloud, their formal language carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the actual investiture. Queen Elizabeth placed the coronet on her son's head with gentle precision. The simple circlet of Welsh gold seemed to transform the young man before the watching crowd. Next came the ring of Welsh gold, slipped onto his finger as a symbol of his union with Wales. The rod, representing his authority, was placed in his hand, followed by the mantle of purple velvet trimmed with ermine. But Perhaps the most moving moment came when Charles knelt before his mother and spoke his oath of allegiance. His words, spoken in clear, measured tones, could be heard throughout the courtyard. I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto you to live and die against all manner of folks. The ancient words, virtually unchanged for centuries, seemed to bridge the gap between past and present. Here was a young man of the modern world, accepting a role that connected him to centuries of Welsh history and British tradition. When Charles rose and turned to face the crowd, the applause was thunderous. Even some who had opposed the investiture found themselves moved by the dignity and sincerity of the ceremony. The young prince's obvious nervousness and genuine emotion had won over many hearts. The ceremony concluded with Charles being presented to the people from the Queen Eleanor Gate, the castle's most prominent tower. Wearing his new regalia, he appeared before the crowds gathered in the town below, many of whom had waited for hours in the July sun just to catch a glimpse of their new prince. The television coverage captured reactions from around Wales and beyond. In mining communities where Charles had visited, people gathered around television sets in community halls and pubs, watching with pride as someone they had actually met received one of the highest honors in the British system. The aftermath of the ceremony was equally significant. A grand lunch was held in the castle's Great Hall, where Charles mingled with guests ranging from Welsh poets to foreign ambassadors. The conversations were animated, with many commenting on how the young prince's genuine interest in Welsh culture had impressed them. Later that afternoon, Charles and the royal family made a progress through the streets of Carnarvon in an open carriage. The crowds that lined the route were enthusiastic, waving Welsh flags alongside Union Jacks. Children who had been given the day off school threw confetti and cheered as the carriages passed. The security concerns that had dominated the planning proved largely unfounded. While there were small protests in some parts of Wales, the day passed peacefully. The genuine warmth of the reception seemed to surprise even those who had organized the event. As evening fell, fireworks lit up the sky over Carnarvon Castle, their colored lights reflecting off the waters of the Menai Strait. The ancient fortress, which had seen so much history, had witnessed another chapter in the long story of Wales and its relationship with the British Crown. The television audience figures, when they were finally calculated, exceeded all expectations. Over 500 million people had watched at least part of the ceremony, making it one of the most viewed events in television history. The images of the young prince receiving his regalia had been transmitted around the globe, introducing many people to Welsh culture for the first time. For Charles himself, the day marked not just the beginning of his formal role as Prince of Wales, but also the start of a lifelong relationship with the Welsh people that would evolve and deepen over the decades to come. The years following the 1969 investiture saw Prince Charles gradually growing into his role as Prince of Wales, but it was not always an easy journey. The young man who had nervously accepted the ancient regalia at Carnarvon Castle faced the challenge of making a centuries-old title relevant in a rapidly changing world. In the 1970s, Charles threw himself into understanding Wales more deeply than any Prince of Wales before him. He made regular visits to Welsh communities, from the industrial valleys of South Wales to the farming regions of the north. Unlike the formal royal visits of previous generations, Charles often arrived unannounced, dropping into local pubs, community centers, and schools to talk with ordinary people. These informal visits sometimes created awkward moments. In one memorable incident in a Rhondda Valley pub, Charles found himself in the middle of a heated discussion about unemployment and the decline of the coal industry. Rather than retreating into royal protocol, he listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. The miners were surprised to find that this privileged young man seemed genuinely interested in their struggles. Charles also began to learn about Wales' environmental challenges. He visited areas where old mining operations had scarred the landscape and spoke with conservationists working to restore damaged ecosystems. This early exposure to environmental issues would later influence his own passion for conservation and sustainable development. The 1970s also brought personal growth for Charles. His marriage to Lady Diana Spencer in 1981 was watched by even more people than his investiture, and Diana's popularity brought renewed attention to the royal family's role in Wales. The couple's visits to Wales were greeted with enormous enthusiasm, particularly from young people who saw Diana as a breath of fresh air in the sometimes stuffy world of royal protocol. Diana brought a different style to royal visits. Where Charles might spend time discussing agricultural policy with farmers, Diana would be photographed hugging children or comforting families affected by industrial accidents. Together, they created a new model for royal engagement that was more personal and emotionally accessible than anything Wales had seen before. However, the 1980s also brought significant challenges. The economic recession hit Wales particularly hard, with coal mines closing and unemployment reaching devastating levels. Charles found himself in the difficult position of representing both the British establishment and a region that felt abandoned by government policy. During the miners' strike of 1984 to 1985, Charles faced some of the most difficult moments of his early years as Prince of Wales. Welsh mining communities, many of which had welcomed him warmly in the past, were now locked in bitter conflict with the government. Charles had to navigate carefully between his personal sympathies for the miners and his constitutional role. He chose to focus on practical help rather than political statements. The Prince's Trust, which Charles had established in 1976, increased its activities in Wales, providing grants and support for young people starting businesses or community projects. This work often went unreported, but it made a real difference in communities struggling with economic hardship. Charles also began to develop his interest in architecture and urban planning during this period. He was deeply concerned about the destruction of traditional Welsh communities through insensitive development. He spoke out against architectural projects that he felt would destroy the character of Welsh towns and villages, sometimes creating controversy, but also starting important conversations about how to balance progress with preservation. One of his most successful initiatives was the regeneration of areas of Cardiff and Swansea that had been damaged during World War II and neglected ever since. Working with local councils and community groups, Charles helped develop projects that combine modern housing with respect for Welsh architectural traditions. The prince's growing confidence in his role was also reflected in his increased use of Welsh language. While his Welsh remained somewhat formal and academic, he made genuine efforts to conduct parts of his speeches in Welsh, particularly when addressing Welsh cultural organizations. These efforts were appreciated even by Welsh language campaigners who had initially been skeptical of his commitment. In 1984, 15 years after his investiture, Charles faced a major test when bomb attacks by extremists targeted Welsh infrastructure during one of his visits. Rather than canceling his engagements, Charles insisted on continuing his planned activities, visiting a hospital where victims of a previous attack were being treated. His calm response helped demonstrate that terrorism would not drive the royal family away from Wales. The 1980s also saw Charles developing his interest in Welsh cultural traditions. He became patron of numerous Welsh cultural organizations and began attending the National Eisteddfod regularly. His presence at this celebration of Welsh language and culture helped raise its profile internationally and showed his genuine respect for Welsh traditions. Perhaps most importantly, Charles began to develop his own distinctive approach to being Prince of Wales. Rather than simply following the formal protocols established by previous princes, he created a more hands-on, personally engaged style of royal service. He wasn't content to simply attend ceremonies and make speeches. He wanted to understand the real challenges facing Welsh communities and find practical ways to help. This approach sometimes brought him into conflict with government ministers who preferred the royal family to remain above political controversy. Charles's willingness to speak out on issues like unemployment, environmental degradation, and urban planning occasionally caused diplomatic difficulties. However, His interventions were usually welcomed by the Welsh people, who appreciated having someone in his position who seemed to genuinely care about their welfare. By the late 1980s, Charles had established himself as a very different kind of Prince of Wales than anyone might have expected from the nervous young man who had received his regalia 20 years earlier. He had grown from a dutiful heir accepting an ancient title into an active advocate for Welsh interests, someone who used his position to highlight problems and promote solutions. The relationship between Charles and Wales had evolved far beyond the symbolic connection established at his investiture. It had become a working partnership, with the prince using his influence and resources to support Welsh communities while learning from their experiences and traditions. This deeper engagement would serve him well as he faced the personal and public challenges that lay ahead in the 1990s. The 1990s brought both the darkest period and some of the most significant moments of growth in Prince Charles's relationship with Wales. The breakdown of his marriage to Diana became front-page news around the world, and the Welsh people, who had embraced the fairy tale couple in the 1980s, found themselves watching a very public and painful separation. The divorce proceedings and the constant media attention created an uncomfortable situation for Charles's role in Wales. Many Welsh people felt genuine sympathy for Diana, and some questioned whether Charles could continue to represent their interests effectively while his personal life was in such turmoil. The warm welcomes he had grown accustomed to during Welsh visits became more subdued, and protesters occasionally appeared at his engagements. The tragedy of Diana's death in 1997 marked the lowest point in Charles's public standing. In Wales, as elsewhere, there was genuine grief for the princess who had brought such warmth and accessibility to royal visits. Charles found himself facing not just personal loss, but also questions about his future role and whether the monarchy itself could survive the crisis. During this difficult period, Charles made a crucial decision that would define the next phase of his relationship with Wales. Rather than retreating from public life or reducing his Welsh commitments, he chose to deepen his engagement with Welsh communities. He seemed to understand that only through continued service and genuine connection could he rebuild the trust that had been damaged. One of the most significant developments during this period was Charles's increased focus on Welsh education and young people. The prince's trust expanded its Welsh operations significantly, providing funding and mentorship for thousands of young Welsh entrepreneurs and community leaders. Unlike his earlier, more formal charitable work, these initiatives were deeply hands-on, with Charles personally meeting with many of the young people his trust was supporting. The establishment of the Prince of Wales Summer School at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama became one of his most successful Welsh initiatives. This program brought together young artists from across Wales and beyond, providing intensive training in traditional Welsh music, drama, and dance. Charles often attended the final performances, and his genuine enthusiasm for the students' work helped raise the profile of Welsh cultural traditions internationally. Charles also began to develop a closer relationship with the Welsh Assembly, which was established in 1999. While maintaining strict constitutional neutrality, he found ways to support the new institution's work on issues like sustainable development, rural communities, and cultural preservation. His meetings with Assembly members were private, but his influence could be seen in the increased attention given to environmental issues and traditional Welsh crafts. The foot and mouth disease crisis of 2001 provided an opportunity for Charles to demonstrate his commitment to Welsh farming communities. When the epidemic devastated Welsh agriculture, Charles made numerous visits to affected farms, often arriving quietly without media fanfare to offer practical support and encouragement to struggling farmers. During one particularly moving visit to a Powys farm, where an entire herd had been destroyed, Charles spent hours talking with a farming family, helping them think through options for rebuilding their business. He later used his influence to help connect them with other farmers who had successfully recovered from similar losses. These personal interventions, often unreported by the media, helped rebuild his reputation among rural Welsh communities. Charles's environmental work also gained new prominence during this period. His organic farm in Gloucestershire became a model for sustainable agriculture that many Welsh farmers studied and emulated. He began hosting conferences on sustainable farming at Welsh venues, bringing together farmers, scientists, and policymakers to discuss practical approaches to environmental challenges. The prince's architectural interest continued to evolve as well. He became deeply involved in the regeneration of Llywyney Wormed, a property in Carmarthenshire that became his Welsh residence. Rather than simply renovating the existing buildings, Charles worked with local craftsmen and architects to create a demonstration of traditional Welsh building techniques combined with modern environmental technology. The house featured locally sourced Welsh slate, traditional lime mortar, and innovative renewable energy systems. More importantly, the renovation project provided training opportunities for local craftsmen and helped revive traditional Welsh building skills that had been in danger of being lost. Charles's personal relationship with Welsh culture deepened significantly during this period. He began collecting Welsh art and commissioning works from contemporary Welsh artists. His patronage helped raise the international profile of artists like Kyffin Williams and ceramicist David Frith, bringing Welsh creativity to global attention. Perhaps most significantly, Charles began to develop a more sophisticated understanding of Welsh politics and identity. He met regularly with Welsh political leaders across party lines, discussing issues from devolution to language policy. While always maintaining constitutional neutrality, he demonstrated a nuanced understanding of Welsh aspirations and concerns that impressed even his former critics. The establishment of the Wales Millennium Centre in Cardiff Bay in 2004 provided a perfect example of Charles's evolved approach to his Welsh role. Rather than simply attending the opening ceremony, he had been involved in the project's development for years, using his influence to ensure that Welsh artists and craftsmen were properly represented in both the building's design and its ongoing programs. By the mid-2000s, Charles had successfully rebuilt his relationship with Wales. Opinion polls showed that Welsh attitudes toward him had largely recovered from the difficult period following Diana's death. More importantly, his actual impact on Welsh communities had deepened considerably. The prince's trust alone had helped over 10,000 young Welsh people start businesses or community projects. His environmental advocacy had also evolved from general speeches about conservation to practical programs supporting Welsh renewable energy projects, sustainable tourism, and organic farming. Universities across Wales were hosting research projects supported by charitable foundations, and Welsh companies were benefiting from the international connections facilitated by his global network. The key to this transformation was Charles's willingness to learn from the crisis period and adapt his approach to serving Wales. Rather than relying on the formal ceremonies and traditional protocols that had defined previous princes of Wales, he had developed a more personal, engaged, and practically useful relationship with Welsh communities. By 2010, 40 years after his investiture, Charles had become something unprecedented, a Prince of Wales who was genuinely seen as an asset by most Welsh people, regardless of their views on the monarchy in general. This transformation set the stage for the major anniversary celebrations that would mark the next phase of his remarkable relationship with Wales. As 2019 approached, marking 50 years since Prince Charles's investiture at Carnarvon Castle, Wales found itself reflecting on one of the most remarkable transformations in modern royal history. The nervous young man who had stumbled through his first Welsh phrases in 1969 had become one of the most knowledgeable and effective advocates for Welsh interests ever to hold the title Prince of Wales. The planning for the anniversary celebrations revealed just how much had changed since that historic July day in 1969. Unlike the formal, top-down organization of the original investiture, the 50th anniversary events were developed through extensive consultation with Welsh communities, cultural organizations, and local governments. Charles himself insisted that the celebrations should reflect the genuine achievements of Welsh people rather than simply commemorating his own role. The centerpiece of the anniversary was not a grand ceremony, but a week-long festival celebrating Welsh culture, innovation, and community achievement. Events took place across Wales, from intimate poetry readings in village halls to major concerts in Cardiff's Principality Stadium. Each event highlighted different aspects of Welsh life that Charles had supported over his 5 decades as Prince of Wales. In the valleys of South Wales, former mining communities showcased businesses started with support from the Prince's Trust. Young entrepreneurs who had once faced unemployment and limited opportunities presented their success stories to international visitors. The contrast with the economic devastation of the 1980s was striking, and Charles's role in supporting these transformations was widely acknowledged. The National Eisteddfod, which Charles had attended regularly for decades, held a special session honoring the anniversary. Welsh poets and musicians performed works inspired by the relationship between Wales and its prince. Some pieces were critical, examining the complex history of English-Welsh relations, while others celebrated the genuine partnership that had developed over the decades. Perhaps the most moving moment came when a choir of former coal miners performed a specially commissioned piece about the transformation of their communities. Many of these men had been deeply suspicious of Charles during the 1984 to 1985 miners' strike, but they now sang about regeneration, hope, and the unexpected ally they had found in the Prince of Wales. The anniversary also provided an opportunity to assess the practical impact of Charles's 50 years of service to Wales. Independent research commissioned by Welsh universities found that his various initiatives had contributed over £500 million to the Welsh economy. More than 15,000 young Welsh people had been directly helped by the Prince's Trust, and many thousands more had benefited from environmental projects, cultural programs, and educational initiatives. The environmental legacy was particularly significant. Wales had become a leader in renewable energy, partly due to early investments supported by Charles's environmental foundations. Welsh organic farming had grown from a tiny niche to a significant sector, with many farmers citing Charles's advocacy and practical support as crucial to their success. Charles's influence on Welsh architecture and planning was also evident throughout the country. Towns and cities across Wales had adopted development guidelines that balanced modern needs with respect for traditional Welsh character. Young Welsh architects trained in programs supported by Charles were now designing buildings that reflected this philosophy. The cultural impact was equally impressive. Welsh language education had benefited from Charles's consistent support, and the language was now thriving in ways that seemed impossible in 1969. Welsh art, music, and literature had gained international recognition through exhibitions and festivals that Charles had helped establish or support. The anniversary celebrations also included a major conference on sustainable development, bringing together experts from around the world to discuss challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, and sustainable agriculture. The choice of Cardiff as the venue reflected Wales's emergence as a leader in environmental innovation, much of it inspired by Charles's early advocacy. During the conference, Charles delivered what many considered his most significant speech about Wales. Speaking in both English and Welsh, he reflected on what he had learned during his 50 years as Prince of Wales. He spoke about the resilience of Welsh communities, the importance of balancing tradition with innovation, and the need for leadership that listens more than it speaks. The speech was notable for its humility. Charles acknowledged the mistakes and misunderstandings of his early years and credited the Welsh people with teaching him about genuine service and authentic leadership. He spoke about how Wales had shaped him as much as he had tried to serve Wales, and how the relationship had become one of the most important and rewarding aspects of his life. One of the most innovative aspects of the anniversary was the creation of a digital archive documenting Charles's relationship with Wales. Working with Welsh universities and media organizations, researchers had collected thousands of photographs, videos, documents, and personal accounts spanning the full 50 years. The archive revealed the depth and breadth of connections that had developed between the Prince and Welsh communities. The archive included touching personal stories, like the letter Charles had written to a Welsh teenager who had lost her father in a mining accident, or the video of him learning traditional Welsh dancing from elderly women in Anglesey. It also documented his evolution as a public speaker, showing his progression from formal, scripted addresses to the more natural, conversational style he had developed through decades of engagement with Welsh audiences. As the anniversary year drew to a close, attention turned to the future. Charles was now in his 70s, and questions about succession and the continuation of his work in Wales became more pressing. However, his son William had begun taking on more Welsh responsibilities, spending time in Anglesey and developing his own relationships with Welsh communities. The anniversary had demonstrated something remarkable, that the ancient title of Prince of Wales could indeed be made relevant and valuable in a modern world, but only through genuine commitment, patient learning, and authentic service. Charles had transformed not just his own understanding of the role, but the very nature of what it meant to be Prince of Wales. As 2020 began, Charles continued his Welsh work with undiminished enthusiasm. The COVID-19 pandemic provided new challenges, but also new opportunities to support Welsh communities. His charities quickly adapted to provide emergency support for struggling businesses and isolated individuals, while his environmental initiatives helped Wales position itself as a leader in green recovery programs. The 50-year anniversary had marked not an ending, but a deepening of the remarkable relationship between Charles and Wales. What had begun as a somewhat artificial ceremonial appointment had evolved into one of the most genuine and effective partnerships between the royal family and any part of the United Kingdom. The young prince who had nervously accepted ancient regalia at Carnarvon Castle had become something far more valuable, a true friend and advocate for Wales whose work would continue to benefit the country for years to come.